What happens when Hollywood spends blockbuster money on a horror movie, and audiences simply refuse to show up? Horror is supposed to be cheap, risky, and insanely profitable. But these 20 movies somehow turned monsters, vampires, haunted houses, and nightmare creatures into financial nightmares for the studios themselves. Some later became cult favorites, others nearly destroyed planned franchises, and number 3 carried a total reported production and marketing price tag close to $300 million. If you love forgotten movies, expensive Hollywood disasters, and strange box office stories, hit like and subscribe to the channel. Number 18. Alone in the Dark, 2005. Video game adaptations already had a terrible reputation when this supernatural action horror movie arrived, and instead of fixing that reputation, it made the problem worse. Christian Slater plays Edward Carnby, a paranormal investigator examining mysterious creatures connected to an ancient civilization. Tara Reid appears as an archaeologist who helps him understand what has been awakened. The movie keeps throwing ideas at the audience: secret government experiments, ancient artifacts, monsters hiding in darkness, mysterious portals, and heavily armed agents attempting to stop everything before the creatures spread. One of its signature sequences places Carnby and his allies inside a facility where the lights become almost as important as the weapons, because the creatures operate best in darkness. Unfortunately, audiences were not interested. The film reportedly cost about $20 million to produce and earned only around $10.6 million worldwide. Even before marketing costs were considered, more than half the production budget remained uncovered by theatrical revenue. What made the failure especially painful was that this was supposed to turn a recognizable horror game property into an action franchise. Instead, poor audience response made it one of the most notorious game adaptations of its generation. A sequel eventually appeared, but without the scale or theatrical ambitions that the original seemed designed to launch. Before we continue, subscribe if you enjoy seeing the movies Hollywood would probably rather forget. And tell us in the comments, which expensive horror flop do you secretly think deserved much better? Number 17. Ghosts of Mars, 2001. By the beginning of the new millennium, John Carpenter's name already carried enormous weight among horror fans. That made the commercial collapse of this strange science fiction horror western even more surprising. The story takes place on a colonized Mars, where police officer Melanie Ballard recounts a disastrous mission involving a prisoner named Desolation Williams and a mining settlement that has suddenly gone silent. What the officers discover is not a normal rebellion. Ancient Martian spirits have been released and are taking control of human bodies, transforming peaceful workers into a violent army determined to eliminate the newcomers. The movie plays almost like a futuristic siege western, with abandoned buildings, dusty landscapes, improvised defenses, and characters trying to escape an enemy that keeps growing. Its most memorable material arrives when Ballard realizes that defeating one possessed attacker does not solve anything because the supernatural force can simply search for another host. That idea gives the movie a nasty little twist. Survival does not automatically mean safety. But audiences stayed away. Against a reported $28 million production budget, the movie's recorded worldwide theatrical total was only a fraction of that amount. Its domestic run ended around $8 million, according to the numbers reporting. Over time, Ghosts of Mars gained defenders who appreciated Carpenter's unapologetically pulpy approach. In theaters, though, it was another reminder that even a legendary horror director's name could not guarantee ticket sales. Number 16. The Order, 2001. On paper, this supernatural mystery had ingredients that should have worked. Heath Ledger had already become a major young star. Brian Helgeland was directing, and the story promised forbidden religious secrets, ancient rituals, and a mysterious figure capable of taking away another person's sins. Ledger plays Father Alex Bernier, a priest belonging to an old religious order. After the suspicious death of his mentor, Alex travels to Rome and begins investigating the existence of a mysterious sin eater. Instead of offering normal absolution, this supernatural figure supposedly absorbs people's sins through an ancient ceremony. The film's strongest moments come when Alex slowly realizes the mystery is not merely theological. The Sin Eater is real, powerful, and connected to a system that has existed outside official church authority for centuries. Those scenes were designed to give the movie the atmosphere of an ancient conspiracy thriller mixed with supernatural horror. The audience response was brutal in financial terms. A production budget of approximately $35 million resulted in only about $11.6 million worldwide. Its opening weekend produced roughly $4.4 million domestically, and the movie disappeared quickly afterward. That performance was especially disappointing because Ledger, Shannon Sossamon, and Mark Addy had previously worked together on A Knight's Tale. Instead of recreating that chemistry in a darker genre, The Order became a mostly forgotten studio horror release whose financial numbers were considerably more frightening than its supernatural villain. Number 15. Fear.com, 2002. Long before every horror movie involved smartphones and social media, this film tried to make the internet itself terrifying. The concept was perfectly suited to early 2000s anxiety. Visit a mysterious website, and something terrible begins happening to you shortly afterward. Stephen Dorff plays Detective Mike Riley, who investigates several unusual deaths connected by one strange detail. Each person recently visited the same disturbing website. Working with Health Department researcher Terry Houston, played by Natasha McElhone, he discovers that the site appears connected to the spirit of a woman seeking revenge. One of the movie's most effective ideas is the countdown structure. Characters know that something is coming, but they cannot simply close a laptop and walk away. Strange visions become increasingly difficult to separate from reality, creating the feeling that the website has somehow escaped the computer. Unfortunately, viewers did not click. The production reportedly cost $40 million, a surprisingly large figure for a supernatural horror film of that period. Worldwide theatrical revenue reported by the numbers was only about $13.3 million. That meant the movie earned roughly one-third of its production cost before even considering marketing or the percentage of ticket sales retained by theaters. Today, its dated internet imagery actually gives Fear.com an unusual time capsule quality. Financially, however, Hollywood probably wishes someone had disconnected the modem before $40 million disappeared into cyberspace. Number 14. Deep Rising, 1998. Imagine Titanic being attacked by enormous sea creatures, then mix in mercenaries, thieves, explosions, and a luxury cruise ship filled with empty corridors. That is essentially the insane energy Deep Rising brought to theaters in early 1998. Treat Williams plays John Finnegan, captain of a small boat hired to transport a group of heavily armed men across the South China Sea. He soon discovers that his passengers plan to rob the massive luxury liner Argonautica. There is only one problem. By the time they reach the ship, something else has already attacked it. The movie's signature images involve enormous tentacle-like creatures moving through the ship's narrow halls, while the surviving characters race through flooded rooms and damaged corridors. Director Stephen Sommers approaches the material almost like a monster-themed amusement ride, balancing horror with one-liners and non-stop movement. That formula eventually gained the movie a loyal cult following. Theater audiences in 1998 were far less enthusiastic. The reported production budget was around $45 million, while the numbers records only about $11 million in its available worldwide box office data, with international reporting from that era incomplete in some databases. Even allowing for missing territorial information, the theatrical performance was widely regarded as deeply disappointing. Ironically, Sommers would soon prove that audiences did want old-fashioned monster adventure. Just 1 year later, he directed The Mummy, which became a massive global success. Deep Rising simply arrived before audiences were ready to buy a ticket. Number 13. The Last Voyage of the Demeter, 2023. Few horror ideas sound safer than Dracula. The character has survived more than a century of adaptations, yet this atmospheric 2023 film discovered that even the world's most famous vampire cannot automatically fill theaters. Instead of retelling the entire Dracula story, the movie focuses on one terrifying section from Bram Stoker's novel, The Doomed Voyage of the Demeter, the ship transporting Dracula's cargo from Eastern Europe to England. Corey Hawkins plays Clemens, a doctor who joins the vessel and gradually realizes that something is hunting the crew during the night. The most memorable scenes turn the wooden ship into a floating haunted house. Sailors hear movement above them, animals become restless, and glimpses of Dracula appear against the darkness, while the crew has nowhere to escape. Open ocean surrounds them in every direction, meaning the characters are effectively trapped inside the monster's territory. The atmosphere earned the movie supporters, but commercially the voyage sank. The production budget was reported at around $45 million, while worldwide box office revenue reached only about $20.4 million. That shortfall was painful because this was not a tiny experimental release. It was a polished studio horror film, built around perhaps the most recognizable monster in cinema history. Several viewers later argued that the film deserved a larger audience. The theatrical numbers, nevertheless, turned Dracula's legendary journey to England into one expensive trip. Number 12. The Thing, 2011. Trying to make a companion film to one of horror cinema's most beloved classics was always going to be dangerous. Instead of remaking John Carpenter's 1982 movie directly, the filmmakers created a prequel showing what happened at the Norwegian Antarctic Station before Carpenter's story began. Mary Elizabeth Winstead plays paleontologist Kate Lloyd, who joins an expedition after researchers discover an enormous spacecraft buried beneath the Antarctic ice. Nearby, they find a frozen creature. Naturally, bringing that creature inside the station turns out to be an extremely bad decision. The central nightmare remains the same as in Carpenter's film. The alien can perfectly imitate living organisms. That means nobody knows who is still human. A particularly memorable sequence involves Kate checking people's teeth for dental fillings, using the idea that an alien imitation may reproduce organic tissue but not artificial material. Fans appreciated the attempt to connect directly with the 1982 classic, especially when the ending lines up with the opening of Carpenter's movie, but the theatrical numbers were disappointing. Against a reported $38 million production budget, worldwide box office reached roughly $27.6 million. That is before advertising and distribution costs are added. The result was financially unsuccessful, but history has been kinder to it. Many horror fans now view the 2011 film as a respectable companion piece, making it another case where home viewing improved a reputation that theaters originally damaged. Number 11, A Cure for Wellness, 2016. Few box office failures on this list look as expensive as this one feels. Director Gore Verbinski created a huge Gothic mystery filled with breathtaking mountain landscapes, enormous old buildings, underground tunnels, medical experiments, mysterious water, and imagery that seems designed to make the viewer uncomfortable. Dane DeHaan plays Lockhart, an ambitious young executive sent to a remote Swiss wellness center to retrieve his company's CEO. What sounds like a simple business assignment immediately becomes suspicious. Patients insist they are being healed, yet nobody appears interested in leaving. As Lockhart investigates, the peaceful spa becomes increasingly sinister. One famous sequence traps him inside a sensory deprivation tank while something unexpected appears in the water around him. Elsewhere, endless hallways and strange treatments transform the luxurious facility into something closer to a prison. The problem was not ambition. The problem was convincing mainstream viewers to spend nearly 2.5 hours inside this strange nightmare. The production cost approximately $40 million, while worldwide box office reached only about $26.6 million. Its domestic opening was just over $4 million. Visually, the money is clearly visible on screen. Commercially, that became part of the tragedy. A Cure for Wellness looked like a premium studio production, but attracted the audience of a much smaller specialty horror release. Years later, it remains fascinating, precisely because Hollywood rarely spends this much money on something this strange anymore. Number 10. Grindhouse, 2007. Two major directors, two feature-length movies, fake trailers, vintage presentation tricks, deliberate scratches on the image, missing reels, zombies, car chases, and nearly 3 hours of entertainment should have sounded like an irresistible deal. Instead, Grindhouse became one of the strangest commercial disappointments of the 2000s. Robert Rodriguez directed Planet Terror, a wild creature outbreak story following survivors trying to escape a rapidly collapsing town. Quentin Tarantino directed Death Proof, centered on a dangerous stuntman who uses his specially reinforced car in frightening ways. Between them came fake trailers designed to imitate the outrageous advertisements shown in old exploitation theaters. The most famous sequence may be the extended car pursuit near the end of Death Proof, where Zoe Bell performs astonishing stunt work while hanging onto the hood of a speeding Dodge Challenger. It feels dangerous because much of what audiences are seeing was accomplished physically rather than through digital effects. The entire Grindhouse package carried a production budget of approximately $53 million. Worldwide theatrical revenue reached about $50 million, which meant the film could not remotely cover theatrical expenses after marketing and exhibitor shares. The concept later worked much better when the movies were released separately in some markets and on home video. The fake trailers even inspired actual feature films. In theaters, though, asking mainstream audiences to spend more than 3 hours watching a tribute to intentionally cheap movies turned into a very expensive experiment. Number 9. Event Horizon, 1997. Sometimes a flop does not disappear. Sometimes it waits years for the audience to finally understand what it was trying to do. That describes Event Horizon almost perfectly. A rescue crew led by Captain Miller, played by Lawrence Fishburne, is sent toward Neptune after the experimental spacecraft Event Horizon suddenly reappears. The ship vanished years earlier while testing a revolutionary gravity drive. Its creator, Dr. William Weir, joins the rescue mission because nobody understands how the vessel returned. Once the crew boards, the mystery becomes increasingly disturbing. The ship appears empty, yet strange visions begin targeting each crew member personally. Eventually they discover that the experimental drive may not simply have moved through normal space. It opened a doorway to somewhere humans were never meant to visit. One of the movie's defining moments occurs when the crew recovers corrupted footage, showing what happened during the ship's disappearance. Instead of providing answers, the recording convinces Miller that leaving immediately is the only sensible option. The production reportedly cost around $60 million. Its initial theatrical performance was extremely weak, with the numbers recording roughly 27 million domestically and incomplete international historical reporting. Other industry references commonly place the global theatrical total around 40 million. Either way, the movie was a major disappointment against its cost. Then something strange happened. Home video transformed its reputation. Horror fans embraced its combination of haunted house storytelling and science fiction, and Event Horizon gradually became a genuine cult classic. Hollywood lost money in 1997. Horror audiences eventually found a movie they were not ready for the first time around. Number 8. Frankenstein, 2014. Somewhere during the era when studios were desperately searching for the next underworld, Frankenstein's monster was transformed into an action hero, fighting an ancient war between gargoyles and demons. Yes, this movie actually happened. Aaron Eckhart plays Adam, the creature originally created by Victor Frankenstein. 200 years after the famous scientist's experiments, Adam discovers that he has become incredibly valuable to supernatural armies because the secret behind his creation could allow other beings to reanimate lifeless bodies. That premise leads to a surprisingly large amount of world building. Gargoyles disguise themselves as humans, demons operate inside modern cities, and Adam spends much of the film trying to prevent either side from controlling Frankenstein's scientific knowledge. The memorable sequences are less traditional horror and more supernatural spectacle. Entire armies clash on rooftops and inside cathedral-like structures, while supernatural creatures disappear in bursts of light. The movie wanted to take Gothic horror mythology and package it like a superhero franchise. Financially, audiences rejected the invitation. The production budget was approximately $65 million, while worldwide theatrical revenue reached about $74.6 million. A movie does not become profitable simply by earning slightly more than its production budget. Theaters receive part of ticket revenue, while advertising and distribution increase expenses significantly. That left Frankenstein. Without the franchise, its ending clearly seemed ready to launch. The monster survived for centuries inside the story. His planned cinematic universe barely survived opening weekend. Number 7. Dreamcatcher, 2003. Stephen King adaptations can produce massive successes, but occasionally, Hollywood spends blockbuster money on one of his stranger stories and discovers that general audiences have absolutely no idea what they are watching. 4 childhood friends, Jonesy, Beaver, Henry, and Pete, share a mysterious mental connection after helping a boy named Duddits when they were young. Years later, the friends reunite for a hunting trip in Maine. Then, unusual events begin happening in the surrounding wilderness. What starts like a character-driven supernatural drama rapidly transforms into an alien invasion horror story involving military containment, telepathic abilities, strange creatures, and a dangerous entity called Mr. Grey. The movie's most talked-about sequence happens when one of the friends discovers that a seemingly sick stranger brought something extremely unpleasant into their cabin. The scene became famous because it combines absurdity and horror in a way audiences were unlikely to forget. Yet the constant tonal shifts may have hurt the film. One minute it feels emotional, the next like creature horror, and moments later it becomes a large-scale military science fiction movie. Warner Brothers reportedly spent about $68 million on production. Worldwide theatrical revenue reached roughly $75.7 million. Again, matching a production budget is not enough. Marketing, distribution, and theaters' share of ticket sales meant the movie fell far short of what was needed for profitability. The film had Stephen King's name, Morgan Freeman, Thomas Jane, Jason Lee, Damian Lewis, and expensive effects. None of that translated into the blockbuster the studio clearly expected. Today, Dreamcatcher survives as one of the strangest big-budget King adaptations ever attempted. A movie too expensive to be a small horror oddity, and perhaps too bizarre to become a mainstream hit. Number 6. Exorcist, The Beginning, 2004. Few horror productions became as complicated and expensive as this prequel. The basic idea sounded simple. Show audiences the early years of Father Lancaster Marin and explain how he first encountered the supernatural force that would later define his life. The production process became far more chaotic than the story itself. Stellan Skarsgård plays Marin, a man whose faith has been shattered by his experiences during World War II. Years later, he joins an archaeological excavation in East Africa, where researchers uncover an ancient church buried beneath the ground. As workers continue exploring the site, unexplained events suggest that something hidden there should have remained untouched. One of the movie's most recognizable sequences involves Marin entering deeper areas beneath the church and discovering that the archaeological site is connected to a supernatural presence much more dangerous than anyone expected. Behind the camera, however, the production became legendary for the wrong reasons. Director Paul Schrader initially filmed a quieter psychological version. The studio was dissatisfied, brought in Renny Harlin, and extensively reworked the project. Schrader's version was later completed and released separately as Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist. That process helped make the financial situation unusually painful. The Numbers lists the production budget for Exorcist, The Beginning, at approximately $78 million. Worldwide box office came to only around $44 million. The brand name was enormous. The original Exorcist had been a cultural phenomenon, yet audiences did not respond strongly enough to this troubled prequel. Even stranger, Hollywood essentially paid to create two different versions of almost the same movie, and neither became the comeback the franchise needed. Number 5. Underwater, 2020. The opening minutes barely allow the audience to become comfortable before everything starts collapsing. Kristen Stewart plays Nora Price, an engineer working inside an enormous drilling facility located miles beneath the ocean surface. Suddenly, the station begins breaking apart. Walls explode inward, corridors flood, and surviving crew members realize their escape pods may be inaccessible. That would already be enough for a disaster movie. Then they discover they are not alone. As Nora and the remaining crew attempt to walk across the ocean floor toward another station, enormous unidentified creatures begin appearing in the darkness around them. The movie gradually transforms from underwater survival thriller into full-scale creature horror. Its most famous reveal comes near the finale, when the characters finally understand that the smaller creatures they have been encountering are connected to something vastly larger, waiting near the drilling facility. Horror fans immediately noticed the design's strong Lovecraftian influence. Commercially, however, the movie sank almost immediately. Worldwide box office reached approximately $40.9 million. Contemporary estimates placed the production cost around $65 million, meaning theatrical revenue never came close to the level generally required to recover production and marketing expenses. The timing made everything worse. Underwater had actually been filmed years before its January 2020 release, leaving it feeling like a project the studio had struggled to position. That is unfortunate, because the movie later found a much more enthusiastic audience on streaming and home viewing. Its fast pacing, impressive production design, and final creature reveal turned it into a modern cult favorite. In theaters, though, even Kristen Stewart could not prevent one of Hollywood's most expensive underwater nightmares from drowning financially. Number 4. Renfield, 2023. Nicolas Cage playing Dracula should have been enough to sell tickets by itself. At least, that seemed to be the theory. Instead of retelling Bram Stoker's story traditionally, Renfield asks what would happen if Dracula's servant finally became tired of working for the world's worst boss. Nicholas Hoult plays Renfield, who has spent generations finding victims, cleaning up disasters, and obeying Dracula's demands. In modern New Orleans, he begins attending a support group and slowly realizes that his relationship with his master is catastrophically unhealthy. That unusual idea gives the movie its best comic scenes. Renfield sits among ordinary people, describing controlling relationships while quietly realizing that his own employer is literally Dracula. Then Nicolas Cage arrives. His performance is deliberately theatrical, arrogant, funny, and frightening, with elaborate costumes and expressions inspired by classic screen vampires. The confrontation scenes between Dracula and Renfield became the movie's biggest attraction. Unfortunately, the film was produced at a scale that required far more than niche enthusiasm. Contemporary reporting commonly placed the production budget around $65 million, while The Numbers now lists an even higher production figure. Box Office Mojo records worldwide theatrical revenue of only about $26.5 million. That gap turned Renfield into one of 2023's most obvious theatrical disappointments. The tragedy is that audiences who actually watched it often enjoyed Cage's performance. But positive reactions from a relatively small group cannot rescue a movie carrying a blockbuster-level price tag. Universal had spent years trying to find a modern future for its classic monsters. Renfield proved the characters still had personality, but perhaps not enough mainstream box office power to justify expensive productions. Number 3. The Mummy, 2017. Here is the movie behind that enormous number in the title, but there is an important distinction. The Mummy did not have a verified $300 million production budget. Box office sources place production estimates anywhere from roughly $125 million to around $195 million. However, reporting at the time described a production cost near $190 million plus, around $100 million in marketing. That means Universal's total global push approached the $300 million range. And Universal was not simply making another monster movie. The studio wanted this to launch the Dark Universe, an interconnected franchise featuring Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Invisible Man, the Wolfman, and other legendary characters. Tom Cruise plays soldier Nick Morton, who accidentally helps uncover the ancient tomb of Princess Amenet. After her remains are transported toward England, supernatural events begin escalating, and Nick discovers that his connection to Ahmanet is far more personal than expected. The most heavily promoted sequence involved an airplane falling from the sky, while Cruise and Annabelle Wallis are thrown violently through a zero-gravity cabin. It looked less like traditional horror and more like a massive action blockbuster, revealing the challenge at the heart of the movie. Was this supposed to scare audiences or compete with superhero franchises? Despite the disastrous reputation, the film actually earned about $409 million worldwide. That sounds successful until the enormous production, marketing, distribution, and revenue-sharing costs are considered. Industry reporting later described an estimated loss around $95 million. The biggest casualty was the Dark Universe itself. Universal had already announced stars and future monster projects. Promotional photographs presented the planned universe like the beginning of the next Marvel-style empire. Instead, one movie arrived, and the original strategy collapsed almost immediately. Number 2. Haunted Mansion, 2023. Disney somehow spent $150 million making a supernatural horror comedy based on an attraction that audiences already knew, then released it directly into the middle of the Barbie and Oppenheimer phenomenon. The result was frightening, but probably not in the way Disney intended. Rosario Dawson plays Gabby, a mother who moves into an enormous New Orleans mansion with her young son Travis. Almost immediately, they discover the building is filled with supernatural residents. Leaving does not solve the problem, because anyone who enters the house may discover that one of its spirits has followed them home. Desperate for help, Gabby assembles an unusual team including paranormal expert Ben, played by Lakeith Stanfield, priest Kent, played by Owen Wilson, historian Bruce, played by Danny DeVito, and psychic Harriet, played by Tiffany Haddish. The movie's biggest visual attraction is the Hatbox Ghost, played through performance and visual effects by Jared Leto. He manipulates the mansion's spirits and becomes the central threat behind much of the haunting. There are also elaborate sequences based directly on imagery from Disney's theme park attraction, including stretching rooms, endless corridors, ghost-filled dining areas, and supernatural passageways. The problem was the economics. That is already disastrous before advertising and theater revenue sharing enter the equation. Deadline's later accounting estimated the movie ultimately generated a net loss of roughly $117 million after expenses and revenue streams were considered. Release timing certainly did not help. The movie arrived 1 week after Barbie and Oppenheimer had created one of the largest theatrical events of the decade. There was another strange decision. A haunted house movie arrived in July rather than near Halloween. The film eventually found more viewers on Disney+, where family audiences could discover it without purchasing theater tickets. But by that point, the theatrical damage had already been done. Number 1. The Wolfman, 2010. Few horror movies demonstrate the danger of an exploding production budget better than this one. Universal wanted to bring one of its most famous monsters back with prestige. Benicio del Toro would play Lawrence Talbot. Anthony Hopkins would play his mysterious father. Emily Blunt would provide the tragic romantic connection. Victorian England would be recreated with enormous sets, elaborate costumes, atmospheric forests, practical makeup, digital effects, and an A-list creative team. Then the production became increasingly expensive. Lawrence returns to his family's estate after his brother disappears. During the investigation, he is attacked by a mysterious creature. He survives, but the wound changes everything. As the full moon approaches, Lawrence discovers that the horrifying stories surrounding the countryside are connected directly to his own family. One of the movie's strongest scenes takes place inside a medical institution, where doctors attempt to convince observers that Lawrence's belief in werewolves is nothing more than psychological delusion. Unfortunately for everyone inside the room, the demonstration happens at exactly the wrong moment. The transformation sequence was designed as a modern tribute to classic Universal monster cinema, with Rick Baker's makeup work giving the creature a recognizable connection to the 1941 original. Yet behind the beautiful Gothic production design was a financially dangerous movie. The production budget climbed to approximately $150 million. Worldwide theatrical revenue reached only around $140 million, with Box Office Mojo reporting just under that figure and the numbers slightly above it, depending on territorial accounting. For a normal low-budget horror release, $140 million would be spectacular. For a film that already cost $150 million before marketing, prints, distribution, and theaters took their share, it was catastrophic. All of those complications cost money. Then the movie opened with around $31 million domestically and dropped sharply during its second weekend. The audience simply was not large enough to justify blockbuster-level spending on a Gothic werewolf tragedy. That is what makes The Wolfman such a perfect number one. So which flop shocked you the most? Was it Renfield earning barely a fraction of its cost, The Mummy helping destroy an entire cinematic universe, or The Wolfman turning one of horror's most famous monsters into an expensive studio headache? Tell us your pick in the comments. If you enjoyed this countdown, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because Hollywood has plenty more spectacular failures hiding behind famous titles.